Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, Thomas Jefferson scholar, philosopher, and historian, soi-disant colonel, and welcome to another episode of The Real Thomas Jefferson. Today, I'd like to talk about a book that was recently published by Abbeville Press. It's called Sally Hemings' Race in Song-and-Dance Historiography, Corruption of Jefferson Scholarship by Institutionalized Wokeism. It's published by Abbeville Press. It just came out. I received some complimentary copies. And I'll talk a little bit about the motivation for the book. Why did I write the book? Well, oftentimes when I am writing a book, I begin a project, I begin a topic about which I talk for a paragraph or two, and I realize, and it's suitable for the book, but I realize there's much more that can be said on the topic. And what happens is I sort of cut and paste a couple of paragraphs to another sheet of paper, and I think about what I've written and expand about it, and I create short essays, many of which you've seen at Abbeville Institute. Are published on the website as a short essay, some 4 to 10 pages at most. And the book here, that Abbeville just put out is a collection of 24 essays, and it's, I think, rather handsomely packaged. It's put together in Times New Roman font, 14-point for those people who want a little bit of larger font, and it's handsomely packaged and very reasonably priced. You can pick up a copy at Abbeville Institute, go to their webpage and look at Abbeville Press, and it's a recent book. So I want to talk a little bit about the motivation for putting it out. There are 3 parts to the book, one of which is on wokeist approaches. The book is essentially about wokeism. One is the part 1 is about wokeist approaches to Jeffersonian biography. Part 2 is on Jefferson and race, and part 3 is wacky woke historiography. So, what is woke? Woke I define in the book as being awake to social injustices, and I think that is a serviceable and as good a definition as any you'll get. And there's really nothing, when you think about it, objectionable about the definition or about the aim of wokeism. If it's just a matter of being awake to social injustices, well, that's fine. And, social injustices are called social injustices because they need to be, quote unquote, justified, made just. We need to eradicate the injustice and put in more just practices and so forth. So there's nothing really objectionable to wokeism if we define it, somewhat succinctly in that manner. The problem with Jeffersonian historiography and much of the wokeism that's rampant today is that it goes much beyond the definition I've given. It goes into what might be, as I say in the title, institutionalized wokeism. By institutionalized wokeism, I mean something like being awake to social injustices in the historiographical climate that is progressivist or postmodernist. And that needs some expuscation, some fishing out here. What is a postmodernist or, as it were, progressivist climate? In the 1930s, 1932, progressivist historian Carl Becker wrote a very, I think it was for the American Philosophical Association, a very, very influential essay titled Every Man His Own Historian. And I say influential because it had a marked influence on his practice of history thereafter. That began the movement of progressivism. And I suspect the political progressivism of today is really an offshoot of this early historical maneuver, historical movement, right? Now, for Becker, there are no facts upon which to base historical narratives. I want to stay with the notion of a narrative. By narrative, I mean that any historical account we give is going to be essentially fictive, meaning taking as a whole, the whole account is going to be a fiction simply because an account that contains at least one falsity is itself a false account. So historians can't really strive for true accounts of some person or some event. That's just a silly notion. What we strive for, in effect, is really a narrative that approximates truth, that gets closer and closer, asymptotically closer and closer to the truth. And the historical process is, in some sense, is an interaction among historians aiming for true accounts. One historian writes something on Jefferson, another reads that account and corrects the mistakes and so forth. And over time, we hope to arrive at, I use the word loosely because there's no comparative for truer, really, that makes any sense, a truer account of some event or person. Now, Becker thinks that truth is passe because each person comes to the table, as it were, with his own unique perspective on things, and we can't escape the perspective. So writing history is essentially subjective. So we can't get around that, he thinks. So what's the point of history? In effect, for Becker, he unabashedly says, "Hi, Jeff, how you doing?" He says, "There is no truth." He says, I quote, "Every generation, our own included, must inevitably understand the past and anticipate the future in light of its own restricted experience, must inevitably play on the dead whatever tricks it finds necessary for its own peace of mind." It's a very strange quote that the process of writing history is fundamentally playing tricks on the dead. And what does he mean by tricks on the dead? I think he means something like, were Thomas Jefferson alive, and if he could somehow see the sort of accounts that people are writing about him, even people not too far removed from his time, he would rise up from his grave and object vehemently that these accounts are substantially incorrect. So we play these tricks on the dead. Why is there the must? Why is it necessitated and so forth? And he talks about each generation, so that we have sort of like generational relativism, that in some sense a generation can communicate. The people of a generation can communicate in some sort of loose way, even though we have the unique subjectivism of each person. There can be some sort of loose communication within a generation within the short period of 20 years or so. And there can be some sort of social understanding, I think that's what he's trying to get at, right? So there can be some sort of loose communication within a generation, but if we try to access historical figures or events of the remote past, or the past or the remote past especially, we write essentially accounts that are ridiculously fictive. Okay. Now, this is taken seriously by people like Annette Gordon-Reed and Pete Owen. If Gordon-Reed goes out of her way to say that, the best accounts of Jefferson overall will be written by the poets who are not encumbered by footnotes. And by that, you mean to worry about facts and grounding my work in factual evidence. I can just write what I want, what I feel like writing. This will tell us as much about Jefferson as anything else. It's a completely moronic idea. That's all I can say. And Peter Owen, famously, as I've said on numerous occasions, tells us that we can't get at Jefferson. He was such a wonderful chameleon. He wrote to each correspondent in a way that agreed with the sentiments or thinking of that correspondent, and revealed nothing about the way he actually thought about anything, which is complete bullshit. Jefferson was, as I've said, always polite enough to write correspondence concerning things about which they wanted to talk. But that said, he could do that because he had a sort of encyclopedic mind where he knew so much about everything. He could talk intelligently about everything. So let's get back to the sort of historiographical model that progressive history is based. You go back to the postmodernist narrative that talks about the pre-modern epoch, if we want to use the word epoch, which goes from earliest history to roughly 1650, the Enlightenment times. We get to the modern phase in which we have the Enlightenment, and the modern phase ends roughly, some people say around 1950, when postmodernism emerges out of the ashes of modernism, right? And we have postmodernism roughly from 1950 to the present. Now, progressivists or postmodernists write of these stages as, in some sense, make any sense of this. You know, what a progressivist or postmodernist is entitled to say is that what I'm doing is just describing how things have worked in history. But to be able to give an accurate description means some sense to understand language in terms of truthful and false assertions. And of course, that's not open to the progressivist or postmodernist. But so that's one of the problems. So we have this pre-modern period, which is roughly from 1650 to the Enlightenment, in which writers of history are seduced by the authority of the Catholic Church and Aristotle. Aristotle's authority goes unchecked roughly for 2,000 years in both the biological realm and the physical realm, the cosmic realm, as it were. His physics is unchallenged till we get people like Galileo and Kepler and Newton and so forth. It's a story for another topic. I've written about this abundantly in some of my books on Jefferson. So here comes the Enlightenment comes in, and with its emphasis on scientificity, namely facts, reason, logic, and it blows away the pre-modern period. At some point, this reliance on scientificity, this reductionist model of reducing everything to observation, to hypothesis generation, and to testing hypotheses and ruling some out and so forth, and confirming and disconfirming, gets pushed aside by the postmodernist epoch, roughly 1950. Anyways, the postmodernist times roll in, where the postmodernist thinkers are pushing epistemic pluralism. Every perspective is just as good as every other perspective. There's no one right way to study the world. Those who have their intuitions or hunches are giving us interesting perspective. Tarot card readers are giving us great perspective. Same thing with religious enthusiasts, people who have inspired by deity, by God is in me, and I'm telling you what's going on. Utterances while you're feverish, and of course, it doesn't rule out science. Science is just one of many different ways of looking at the world, and all these are legitimate, whatever legitimate means in a world where there is no truth, right? So this is what Gordon Reed means, and that when she says that the poets will give us perspectives on Jefferson that are just as revealing, if not more so, than the people who write history. All right. Now, I hope you realize that this postmodernist model is complete bullshit. It makes no sense. I mean, it presupposes, in some sense, one of the problems it presupposes that it's a progressive model, that in some sense, scientificity in modernism comes back and replaces pre-modernism because of the defects of modernism. It's sort of Thomas Kuhn sort of problem here. It's better, right? And postmodernists and progressivists are not really enabled to talk about normativism, to talk about something being better than another thing. Their program is specifically, it's supposed to be specifically descriptive, not evaluative, hence my use of normativism to talk about, being able to evaluate one program. And then when postmodernism comes in, replaces modernism, because of the reductive problem of the scientific project, we wind up with epistemic pluralism. Anything goes, and everything's just fine. We're all happy with that. So to base your historical narratives on postmodernism, I hope you realize, I don't have to explain, it's a non-starter. It goes nowhere. Anything goes. That's why we get the garbage written by Pete Onuff. That's why we get the garbage written by Annette Gordon Reed. And of course, we're in a habit of awarding Pulitzer Prize and sorts of literary awards to figures like Gordon Reed, who write nonsense. So, in effect, I end by noting that my book, and I think it's put out in a very handsome, attractive cover by Abbeville. It's very reasonably priced. You can contact the people of Abbeville for a copy. I have at present 5 copies given to me gratis, and I'd be happy to autograph for a reasonable price and send you an autographed copy with an inscription or quote if you're interested. If not, you can contact Abbeville Institute and get at a very, very reasonable price. All their books are reasonably priced. Copy of this book. I hope you'll find it an important book on Thomas Jefferson. It is not, as I said, to challenge the view that wokeism is important, that addressing social issues is important. The idea is we can't even have an understanding of what a social issue is unless we factor in truth, some sort of meaningful way to evaluate different quote unquote social problems. I can't identify something as a social problem without this notion of truth. Very valuable notion. As other philosophers have noted, we just can't do without the notion of truth. It's indispensable for human communication. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this, and I say TTFN. Do this again on another occasion.